Hey, y'all, it is Coach Ruth. I am a writer, an author, and an author coach, and I'm here today to talk about your inner critic origin story. All of us deal with some level of the inner critic. I have found that within the writing community, there's basically two groups. There's a tiny group and then a giant group. So the tiny group are narcissists who face no self-doubt and don't have an inner critic speaking while they write. And then there's the rest of us. The vast majority of writers and creatives deal with some level of inner critique that's hard for them to overcome to get work done. And I've found in working with writers that understanding your own inner critic origin story can help you navigate your inner critic effectively. The number one thing that I hear writers say that is a dead giveaway that they're dealing with their inner critic is, I'm not a real writer. So if you've thought that about yourself, that's actually, to me, proof that you probably are a real writer, because who are the real writers, right? So if you don't feel like you're one of the real writers, I often will ask writers, well, what makes you feel that way? And they'll say, well, I haven't published anything, or I don't have a book out. And I have to ask, what order do you think that happens? We have to write in order to see the fruit of our writing. But many people feel like, I have nothing to show for it, therefore I'm probably not a writer, therefore I'm not going to write because I'm not a writer. And it becomes this like self-fulfilling doom prophecy. So to get around that, we have to understand that that's the inner critic. There are no real writers. There are just writers. Writing is a skill-based discipline that rewards commitment to the craft. It's like playing the piano or learning to ride a bike or learning to speak another language. All of those are things you can wake up one day and decide to pursue. And if you say, oh, I'm not bilingual because I'm not a language learner, and therefore you'll never learn another language, if that's the way you think about yourself. So real writers are ones who pursue the writing life and invest in building their skills. And you're here today, which is a sign to me that you are a real writer. Imposter syndrome and not feeling like a real writer can happen at any point in your writing life. It usually happens when we're starting out because we don't have any evidence to the contrary. We have no proof of concept, and writing just feels aspirational. So we think, who am I to think of myself as a writer? And if that's where you are, at any point, you can choose to step out of that mindset and step into a growth mindset. But I also see, I coach writers. I coach about 300 writers a year as of this recording. And I see a lot of writers who have already seen initial success who are now working on books 2, books 3, or however many. And they've hit some kind of roadblock around their inner critic because they think maybe the first time I got lucky, or this new idea is asking something of me that I didn't need for my first idea. So I feel like I'm starting over in a sense. This new project is really feels harder. You know, I found that I wrote several books, they were published, and then I started a new project and I thought, I feel like I can't do this. So I went over to the shelf and I looked at the books I had already written and that were already published. And I said, see, I did those. And my inner critic said, yes, but those were different. You've never written this book before. That's just how the inner critic is. The inner critic is a punk and always has something to say. But I have found in working with so many writers that getting to the root of your own inner critic origin story can help you learn to navigate your own struggles with the inner critic more effectively. So depending what is the loudest voice that you hear, you'll know how to respond. A lot of us are dealing with uncertainty and inexperience, especially early on. So if you think, I'm not sure what I'm doing, this is really hard, I don't know if I can do it, that is just the natural, that's the natural way a lot of people feel when they're trying something new. So if that's your inner critic origin story, then what's the antidote for that? Give yourself some experience. Then your inner critic can't say, you've never done this before, you don't know what you're doing, and so forth. So if that's what you're feeling, the antidote to that is to press on. But often our inner critic is actually an external critic who was part of our lives or is still part of our lives, and we've internalized some external criticism. You may have had a teacher early on or someone in college say something to you about your writing or your thinking abilities, or really fill in the blank. You may have had a parent or a caregiver who tore you down and didn't encourage you in your pursuits. And you may have internalized that voice. And it may now be such a part of the way that you think that you may no longer process it as externalized criticism. If this is part of your story, honestly, part of the antidote to that we're going to get to in the next section, but you need to question that voice. I have learned that there are people who have earned the right to speak into my creative life. And then there are voices I would never turn to for advice. And often those are my external critics. So if this is not someone that you would naturally turn to for creative advice, then when you hear their voice speaking in your head, you have to question, what is the value in listening to that? And if you've internalized some external criticism, it could be that you have to do some work apart from your writing life to start dealing with that. And that will help you in many areas of your life as well. It could be that your inner critic is fueled by perfectionism. And this is a tough one. I am not overly burdened with perfectionism. This video will probably give you proof of that at some point. I do try to do my best, but I make mistakes. And this is true in the writing life as well. And the beauty of the writing life is you get to submit to the drafting process, which means you can write as many drafts as you want before anyone ever sees it. But the voice of perfectionism will tell you you're never going to get out of the drafting process because nothing's ever good enough to be seen by others. And so if your inner critic origin story is fueled by perfectionism, your approach to answering your inner critic, navigating your inner critic is going to be different from if your primary inner critic is externalized criticism that you've internalized or uncertainty and inexperience. The antidote for perfectionism we'll get to in this next section. The beauty of dealing with your inner critic is our goal, especially initially, is not to fully wait until we fully silence the inner critic. We can get a lot of work done while navigating with a pretty active inner critic. I have done it. As of the time of this recording, I have 5 plays that are out and being performed nationally and internationally. I have 9 books that are traditionally published and a few with my agent right now that are on submission. And I'm writing more all the time, and articles and essays and all kinds of other things. And I have managed to get all of that done with a pretty active inner critic because of the techniques that I'm going to show you right now. So doing some mindset work around your inner critic can be really helpful. First of all, remember that your inner critic is an unreliable narrator. This is going to be really helpful for my perfectionist friends, especially. An unreliable narrator is a character or a person who doesn't always tell the truth. And it's that doesn't always that's the sticky point, because they tell the truth sometimes, but not all the time. So you can't always believe them, but you also can't just dismiss them out of hand as a total liar. I've heard people say that the inner critic is a punk and a liar. And I do believe that the inner critic is a punk, but the inner critic isn't always a liar. What the inner critic is trying to do is save you from embarrassment. And that feels like a good thing. But sometimes the inner critic thinks certain things are bad or embarrassing that really aren't. So because your inner critic is unreliable, you have to question it just the way you would with anyone in your life. We all have someone in our lives who's an unreliable narrator. And when they tell us something, we think, I should ask some questions about that. So that's when you conduct a Q&A with your inner critic. We'll practice that more in a minute. I also encourage you to build some community around your writing. I'm part of a writers group, and that really is helpful because my inner critic, especially when I'm writing new drafts, will always tell me, you're trying to write a romantic comedy. This is not romantic or funny. And I'll get really discouraged because my first drafts are not really good and my revisions don't feel good either. But I know once a month I'm going to meet with my writers group and I'll read a scene out loud and people will laugh and I'll go, oh my gosh, something in this is working. And they'll help me when sometimes I suspect things aren't working and they aren't. And sometimes I suspect things aren't working and they are. And so I don't have to depend on my own judgment or the word of my inner critic when I have community around my writing. So this is why I work as a coach. I build networks and coaching and community programs so that we don't have to be alone with our inner critic. Recognize that creative angst is often cyclical. So there are certain points in my writing process that I experience more angst around my inner critics than others. It's kind of like waves at the shore. Sometimes the tide is strong and sometimes the tide is weaker, but I'm aware that there's a tide. And as long as I know I'm in one of those cycles, I can go, okay, I always feel like this. I have a sister who I talk to a lot about my creative life, and I called her up in arms a few months ago. And I was like, I'm writing something, but it's dumb and it's stupid. And this probably isn't going to work. And I may have to abandon it and write something else. And she said, oh, that phase. She said, you say that about every single project that you work on. And that's when it really clicked into me that my struggles with the inner critic do tend to be cyclical. So I can be aware of that sometimes is more reliable than others. There are times when we have to work on ourselves and seek healing, and our writing life benefits from it. So if you are really dealing with really deep-seated wounds, around perfectionism or external critics or feeling inexperienced and all of these things, it could be that counseling or therapy is right for you. And that will help you not just in your writing life, but could help you flourish in your entire life. We are whole people. I talk a lot about the writing life, but we're whole individuals. And so when we heal in one area, it helps us in other areas. And when we're wounded in some areas, it keeps us wounded in other areas. And so it could be that pursuing some counseling and some therapy could help you overcome some of this. But I've found the best way to navigate my inner critic is just to talk back. So when my inner critic says things like, I have no idea what I'm doing, which is often what you feel at the beginning of a writing life or the beginning of a project, you respond by questioning that. So if you really have no idea what you're doing, you think this is a skill-based discipline. I'm learning new skills as I go. The beginning of all new pursuits are hard. I'm taking language lessons right now. My first few lessons were just terrible. I didn't know anything. And because my teacher's a good teacher, she wasn't just speaking to me in English and saying, memorize this and memorize that. She was fighting for communication, which made me work so hard. And I felt like I had no idea what I'm doing. But in reality, I was learning new skills as I went. And that's how the writing life feels. So when your inner critic says you have no idea what you're doing, you can say, well, I'm learning new skills as I go. And it's usually not true that you have no idea what you're doing. You just feel uncertain. Often we'll compare ourselves to another writer in our heads, which, first of all, you should never do this because there is no other person like you. And there's no other person like her or like him. God made you one of one. Your creator made you exactly who you are to sound like you are and have your thoughts. You don't have to sound like anybody else to be good. Also, when you look at other writers' work, you're usually looking at their polished, edited version, and you're looking at one of your garbage drafts and looking at them and going, oh my word, I'll never be as good as she is. I'll never be as good as he is, when really you're not comparing. You're comparing apples and oranges. So when your inner critic says you're never going to be as good as fill in the blank, you respond by saying, I'm not trying to be her. I'm not trying to be him. I want to be a better version of myself. And I'm learning new things as I go. So I'm becoming a better writer, a better version of Ruth, the writer. This is my inner critic right here. My inner critic always tells me whatever I'm working on is too much work. And I could be doing literally anything else with my life. I tend to write in the morning, so I wake up early and I think I could do anything else. I could quit right now and almost no one would notice. And no one asked me to do this anyway. Why am I doing this? It's too much work. So when my inner critic says that, I have to question, okay, why is that bad? Who decided that work was bad? God made me who I am for a reason, and I'm made in the image of a creator. So when I do this kind of work, I'm imaging my creator to the world, and that's wonderful, regardless of what the results turn out to be. The work itself has value, and hard work isn't bad. So I can do what only I can do, which is the work, and the results are kind of out of my hands anyway. So when my brain says this is too much work, I would say to my brain, you know, most of the valuable things in life are things we have to work hard for, and hard work isn't bad. It's just hard. So the biggest question all of our brains ask is, what if it's bad? What if I spend all this time on this and it's bad? What if I put all this work and invest all of this and it's horrible? Honestly, the best way to deal with this when your inner critic whips this one out is to just reverse it and say, what if it's good? What if it could be really good and I give up on it too soon? Writing is a long process, and projects can take a very long time, upwards of years and years. And so what if this could be groundbreaking and history making and creatively fulfilling, and I give up on it too soon because I only asked half of the question? Instead of asking, what is it bad? We have to ask, What if it could be really good? And if I can't see, if there's a gap between what I know I'm doing right now and where I'd like to take the work, where can I get the tools and resources and skills to fill that gap so that I can make it really good? And what if this could be amazing and I give up on it too soon? So knowing your inner critic origin story can help you navigate your inner critic with more skills, tools, and resources. But I would say it could all be boiled down into one basic rule of thumb. You're not allowed to talk about your writing in a way you wouldn't talk about or to another writer about theirs. So you're not allowed to say anything about yourself and your writing that you wouldn't say to another writer. Often I find in our community, we're much kinder and more encouraging to other writers than we are to ourselves and within ourselves. So if you're having trouble figuring out how to answer your inner critic when your inner critic is being hard on you, think, if I heard another writer say this about her writing or about his writing, what would I say in response? And then say that to yourself. Now, I hope that everyone who watched this video got something helpful out of it about how to navigate the inner critic. If you are a nonfiction writer, especially a Christian writer or speaker, who wants to work on a nonfiction book and your goal is traditional publishing, I have a program right now designed just for you. So head up to the link in my bio, click through. It'll take you through to where I put a lot of my resources. Send me a message that says start, and I'll send along a resource just for you to get you started on your pitch so that you can pitch your next nonfiction book for traditional publication. Y'all, keep writing. It's worth it.